Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Cynthia Lee Smith, and I'm here today with another video essay of one that I wrote back on May 3rd, not in response to, but as to provide a different perspective and insight for Black America as it relates to the ramifications of Roe versus Wade and if it gets overturned. Because there are many of us who don't think of or any possibility at this point. There are at least two generations now that don't remember when it was legal, it was law to discriminate against Black people and to openly mistreat Black people with impunity. Before I begin the essay, I'd like to read for you a commentary that I wrote on Facebook to kind of give you an understanding of the extent of how history, the extent of what history plays on the future, and how it's important to understand history, which will give you an idea why the Republicans and the white supremacist racists in that party are so adamant about ensuring that you don't know what real history is, what the real history of America is. They don't want you to have any inkling about its true history, because to do so, you would be able to make more informed decisions about what's going on today. Now, history taught us that when Reconstruction was overturned in 1877, the Supreme Court was instrumental with Congress in overturning the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Now, understand, there were many civil rights acts passed, but none of them held the kind of weight that white supremacism held. Now, the Supreme Court was instrumental with Congress in overturning the Civil Rights Act of 1866, solidifying racist laws, policies, and practices against Black people that stood, now listen, that stood until the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Now keep that in mind. As amended, was signed. By 2013, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted. And as of today, there are many more acts of suppression and state-sponsored violence against Black people. It has never ended. It has never stopped. The subjugation of Black people has never stopped. There's always been a concerted effort by the white supremacists and racists to draw us back into where they believe we should be. And that's chattel. Now, this is what I want you to understand, and I'm going to try not to deviate from what I'm reading as I read this part. Yet, there are those who can't conceive that what happened before in this country's history could ever happen again to Black people. That we were protected from changes in the laws. I'm going to read that again. There are those who can't even conceive that what happened before in this country's history could ever happen again to Black people. That we are protected from changes in laws. Think so? I want you to imagine for a moment, just for a moment, what the black people who had become self-sufficient by 1877, and oh, there were many black people who had become self-sufficient. There were black people in Congress. Black people were voting. So imagine what they thought when on May 18th, 1896, the Supreme Court literally changed history and precedent with their separate but equal decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld state-sponsored Jim Crow laws. Now, everybody's familiar with Jim Crow laws. Everybody's familiar with Jim Crow. But Jim Crow was just more prevalent in the South. It existed in the North as well, and the West. It existed all over the country in one form or another because of what? Hands? States' rights. Which really means the states can dictate what they want to do with they niggers. And I'll just add, just to placate those people who want to join in the oppression with us, and I'm not being belligerent or facetious here, because today there are more openly discriminated classes of people in this country, and they have to be addressed too, but not to the exclusion of us. This is the thing. This is why I stress black people, because there is so much discussion of the others and not enough of ours. Because people don't think that that could happen, I would suppose. Or they just don't want to think of that. Or they just don't want to deal with that. So just imagine for a moment that the people who were self-sufficient by 1877, what they thought when Plessy versus Ferguson completely overturned, upturned, destroyed their rights under the law. No one thought it could or would happen then either. I'd be willing to place bets. And I'd be willing to place bets because you'd have to know that all during that time, there were white supremacists and racists and violent people who were doing what it is that they do to black people back then too. But for some reason, they probably thought that none of this would happen, that it couldn't possibly happen. They couldn't just change the law. Well, I'm here to tell you, yes, they can. They did it with Roe versus Wade, or will be doing it with Roe versus Wade. And I'm going to get into that essay in a minute. So no one thought it could or would happen then either, but then the Supreme Court decision became the legal basis for racial discrimination and violence in the United States for the next 50 years. For the next 50 years. Now, it all may seem far-fetched to you right now. Could be that I'm just spouting I'm being hyperbolic. But for 49 years, Roe versus Wade was thought to be the law of the land. And look what just happened. Look at what was just leaked. And that is the segue into my essay for today, and that is called Unveiling the Threats. The Supreme Court Metasticized Supremacism and Saying It Out Loud. We knew for months that the Supreme Court, as constituted in 2022, was poised to overturn Roe versus Wade, the judicial ruling that essentially gave agency to women to control whether they gave birth. Now, in an unprecedented leak from directly inside of the halls of the Supreme Court, a preliminary decision confirms what we knew. And indeed, although known, the shockwaves are nevertheless reverberating all over the country. But of course, as those who read my essays know, this essay is not just about Roe versus Wade or women's rights. And see, this is what I want to bring to the attention of people. I recently read this on the Michael Gay talk show on Saturdays. It comes on Saturdays at 6 on the Michael Gay Network on Blog Talk Radio. And I read the essay, and a former attorney decided that it wasn't a racial issue, but what he probably did not hear, because he wasn't trying to understand the implications beyond Roe versus Wade, was that it was more about politics. Republican versus Democrat, he said. That it wasn't about race at all. Although, and I pointed this out in part of the decision, the part with Amy Coney Barrett's signature, she talked about a supply, a necessary, a needed supply of domestic infants. Now, anyone with a shred of brain, with a brain cell, would have to understand, and I don't want to say it like that, no, I'm not going to say it like that. Anybody who understands the coded language of white supremacism knows that when you say a supply of domestic infants, you're talking about white babies. You're talking about a supply of white babies that are necessary for adoption, because this is what she's relating it to. She says for adoption. And that's opposed to what? Importing a supply of babies from Europe, which is what has to be done most often now. And not just from Europe, but any non-black country. So, as I was saying, I had this discussion with the former attorney who was a guest on the show, very learned individual. We had a very stirring conversation earlier about some questions I had about law versus the Constitution. And when he said that it didn't have anything to do with black or white, but more about Republican and Democrat, I wanted to say to him that this is what that he is naive if he believes that race is not in everything. Because white supremacy lives in politics, education, labor and employment, economics, everything, the environment, everything. And you have to understand, you have to acknowledge, you have to admit that this is the case to move forward and have a critical conversation about how race affects the decision in Roe versus Wade. We're talking ramifications here. And we're talking about, we're not saying, and I'm not saying necessarily that Roe versus Wade is about race. And this is where he was trying to take it. People who know me know that I write a very, very specific, distinct way. I said this essay is not just about Roe versus Wade. See, not only about Roe versus Wade. See, you need to understand that I'm not just saying Roe versus Wade is racist. Roe versus Wade is all about race. No. I want you to open your minds and think about ramifications of a decision affecting the lives of individuals and how it can be overturned or how it can be turned into law that affects you and me. Remember what I talked about when Reconstruction was overthrown. Just think Plessy. This essay is also, see, there's that term, also. See, but when you want to make sure, when you want to ensure that race don't have nothing to do with this, okay, let's not put race into this one. Let's not change this into a racial issue. Then you're not going to hear not just about Roe versus Wade. And you're not going to hear. This essay is also about what no one, and I mean no one, will say out loud. What no one will say out loud. Not the media, not the pundits, not the politicians, and not the people at the water coolers, hallways, or desks surrounded by cubicles in corporate America. Will this country repeat this latest attempt at deconstructing Reconstruction? Because in 1968, there was a new reconstructive period going on. Call it what you wanna. Call it the civil rights movement. Call it black people were really trying to get a hold of our liberty and freedoms again, like we had before Reconstruction failed. And before Plessy versus Ferguson. I want you to pay attention. See beyond the obvious. Roe versus Wade was undoubtedly the grapes on the vine. You know how they call it the low-hanging fruit. I just didn't want to be cliche in my essay. But it was the grapes on the vine and not the apples high on the branches. It was easy. And you know why I say it was easy? Because in reality, I might get some flack for this, and I'm fully prepared to engage the flack. There are more white women in this country who want to maintain their position within white supremacist ideology than are concerned about abortion. Now, I don't want you to make any mistake now, but this they say abortion rights and all this kind of stuff. The real issue is the right of a woman to control her own body. That is what the issue is. That's what the issue is. If people keep saying, it gives me my right to get an abortion, the people who don't want you to get an abortion are going to win. Focus. But I digress. This is not to say that a woman's right to abortion wasn't as consistently attacked as the rights of black people in recent history. There is only the issue of timing. 49 years of threat is considerably shorter than 145 years. Both, however, are nonetheless in real jeopardy. But Roe versus Wade is what they are willing and able to say out loud. Why? Because it's a woman's issue. And by God, white women know that in order to gain support of black women, this is one of those, I guess you could call them one of those intersections, because black women get abortions too. And black women deserve the right to get one. Black women, however, more than that, they deserve the right to control their own bodies, because we are the ones, abortion or not, who until 1960, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, did not have control over our own bodies. Look it up. One of the reasons why Rosa Parks got on that bus was in protest to our treatment on those buses. Rapes, open rape, beat downs. We had no right to our own bodies. Damn an abortion. So when I say that this is the one that they say out loud, that they can say out loud, it's because as women, because it's not black people. That's somehow taboo. Still, when mentioning the rights of the so-called protected classes, and I'm going to read on that in here. They'll say everything else. First thing out is LGBTQ. Now, that's not to say that their subjugation is not important. But they say it. The people who are charged with reporting on these kinds of things so that we understand and we know what's going on, they talk about that to the exclusion of what can happen to black people. Oh, wait. With the one exception of voting rights. All one has to do is go back to 2013 and they know that our voting rights were gutted. Then suppression began. There was suppression even before then. 15th Amendment be damned. 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 15 There's even more voter suppression because there's basically no Voting Rights Act to protect black people. But they'll talk about that. But they won't call it black voting rights. They'll say voting rights for poor and underserved. And you and I know what that is code for in this country. And if you don't, I'm telling you, that's code. That's white supremacist code. Because they don't want to use the B word. Yet through the deafening sounds of outrage over the leak at the Supreme Court, there is that familiar, raucous silence permeating the air of all the other rights that are mentioned being at risk, and this is what I was talking about. There is absolutely never no specific mention of the rights of black people. Specific mention. Specifically using the term black people in this country, even as these have been consistently threatened since enslavement ended. I mean, you'll hear a cursory black people every now and then. They'll throw it out there, but it's never. They say voting rights. They don't say the rights of black people to vote because, come on, let's face it. Let's face it. Whose voting rights, since Reconstruction was overthrown, whose voting rights were being affected? Whose? Now you'll say, oh, but women didn't get the right to vote until. That was white women. Here's what I'm hearing. This is only the beginning. Next, they will be going after contraception. And I'm not being facetious here. Don't get me wrong. I am not making light of this because it is horrendous. This is a potential danger for the rights of all Americans. Because why? Because all lives matter. It won't stop here. Where will they go next? LGBTQ rights? Other rights? I guess, now, I just want to say here, and then I'll go back to reading the essay. What exactly are other rights? Other people's rights other than the group of people that you decide to name? Why not just say LGBTQ rights? Black rights? Why can't you say black rights? What is so wrong in blacks having rights? Or saying it out loud? These, among other things, which sound the nation's alarm, and rightly so, indicate the Supreme Court is now captured by the same ideology which informed Adolf Hitler in his treatment of Jewish people and the other, that word, the other, in Europe back in the 1930s. You think not? All you have to do is listen and read what is being said and written by people who identify as Republican, the political party of which the majority of the Supreme Court are a part. I am sounding the alarm now. I'm doing it now. because I think it's important to do. Whether it is seen as hyperbole or fear mongering, or any other naysay that can be produced when it comes to the rights of black people in this country. If the upsurge in white supremacist violence, the extent of voter suppression, and the direct assault on the lives of black people in this country by local and state police violence aren't valid indicators of viable threats, then exactly what are? Oh, I did also want to mention, just as an aside, that the former attorney who wanted to keep race out of this was a former police officer. Just as an aside. Why are these threats still being shrouded as though this same Supreme Court would never do what this country's history, remember what I read you before this essay, what this country's history has shown time and time again they have done in the past and could very well do in the future? What is it about the rights of black people that it cannot be mentioned directly but veiled behind the rights of other protected classes that are spoken of out loud? I mean, are you understanding where I'm coming from here? Gay marriage, gay rights, and I'm not discouraging any of it. I'm not discounting any of it. Do not try to obfuscate this essay or my intent. Black lives matter too. Why do you suppose it had to be stated emphatically, explicitly, that black lives matter? Think about that. Think about that term and think about it specifically. I'm not talking about it's a Antifa group or all of the kind of crap. I'm talking about the statement of fact that black lives matter too. Why do you suppose it had to be explicitly said, written, discussed? Because of all of the other things that are discussed out loud, black lives are never discussed as a separate, specific issue. That's why. Why has it been, for at least the last 50 years, so taboo to attribute all of the white supremacist threats to every other group, but the very ones for whom the terror, violence, and subjugation has been a consistent theme? There were Confederate flags at that Capitol building. I mean, why even mention white supremacist if the threat isn't about race? I mean, they have begun to use the term in the media. They have finally acquiesced and begun to use the term white supremacist. They still haven't gotten to the point where they can call them racist, but they have, in some cases, admitted to and acknowledged that white supremacism exists, finally. This obvious metastasizing of the white supremacism in the Supreme Court is certainly genuine enough at this point in our history to at least realize that the threat is no longer veiled, but a possibility and will be a probability if the autocracy created by the Republicans succeed and democracy ends. But what in this so-called inclusivity of included protected classes of people in this country will it take for it to say, black people, you in trouble too? Black people, you need to really get up and out and show out and talk about the potential of this Supreme Court as a result of Roe versus Wade ruling on things that take away your rights. Changing the law. So what will it take for it to say, black people, you in trouble too, to be spoken loudly as the right to an abortion or same-sex marriage? Well, I'm saying it, and out loud. Someone's got to. Roe versus Wade is just the beginning, but black people, you in trouble too. Now that brings me to the end of another essay. I hope that it provided you some insight into the ramifications of Roe versus Wade. I hope that you can see beyond Roe versus Wade. Put some comments in. Don't agree? Come on with it. I am interested in all comments, whether they're in agreement or disagreement. Don't forget to like and share this video. And remember, visit my website at www.calise-writer.com. For now,